Welcome to Clinical Thinking Lab Episode 3. Today's case is about massive pulmonary embolism. But the deeper lesson is not only how to diagnose pulmonary embolism, the deeper lesson is how to manage a patient when the treatment that may save their life can also cause a life threatening complication. This is where medicine becomes difficult because sometimes we are not choosing between a good option and a bad option. We are choosing between two dangerous possibilities. So today's case is about obstructive shock, thrombolysis, intracellular hemorrhage, and clinical trade-offs. This is a 72-year-old man presenting with sudden shortness of breath, pleuritic chest pain, and near-syncope. He is 12 days post-knee replacement. That history matters because recent orthopedic surgery increases the risk of venous thromboembolism. His vitals are concerning. Blood pressure is 82/48. Heart rate is 126. Oxygen saturation is 86%. So immediately, this is not just a stable patient with possible pulmonary embolism. This is a patient with shock physiology. The question I need to ask is, what physiology is killing him right now? And in this case, the most likely answer is obstructive shock from massive pulmonary embolism. On examination, he has jugular venous distension, a swollen right calf, and clear lungs. That combination is important. The swollen calf suggests possible deep vein thrombosis. The clear lungs makes primary pneumonia or pulmonary edema less likely. The JVD suggests right-sided pressure overload. His lab shows troponin 0.62, which is elevated, BNP 980, and lactate of 6.4. Ultrasound shows right ventricular dilation and septal bowing. So the picture is now stronger. This looks like massive pulmonary embolism causing acute right ventricular strain and obstructive shock. Troponin here does not automatically mean acute coronary syndrome. In this context, troponin can rise because the right ventricle is under severe strain and develops myocardial injury. BNP can also rise because the right ventricle is stretched. So the biomarkers support right ventricle strain, but the physiology is still the key. My diagnosis is massive pulmonary embolism causing obstructive shock. The evidence for that is severe dyspnea, pleuritic chest pain, near syncope, recent knee replacement, hypotension, hypoxia, swollen calf, jugular venous distension, clear lungs, high lactate, elevated troponin and BNP, and ultrasound showing right ventricular dilation and with septal bowing. The dangerous alternative is acute right ventricular infarction because right ventricular infarction can also cause hypotension, jugular venous distension, and clear lungs. But in this case, the combination of recent surgery, swollen calf, hypoxia, and ultrasound finding makes massive pulmonary embolism more likely. The biggest teaching point here is do not interpret troponin in isolation. Treat physiology, not biomarkers. The troponin is important, but it does not replace the clinical picture. The immediate threat is obstructive shock. In massive pulmonary embolism, the pulmonary arteries are blocked. The right ventricle suddenly has to pump against a much higher resistance. The right ventricle dilates. The septum bows into the left ventricle. Left ventricular filling decreases. Cardiac output falls. Blood pressure drops. Lactate rises because tissues are under perfused. So this is not just a clot problem. This is a circulation problem. The patient is dying from impaired forward flow. That is why massive pulmonary embolism is dangerous. The goal is not only to prevent more clot, the goal is to restore perfusion. My initial management would start with oxygen and monitoring. I would give unvaccinated heparin because it is rapidly acting and can be stopped quickly if needed. But heparin alone does not rapidly dissolve the clot. Heparin prevents clot propagation. In a stable PE, that may be enough, but in massive pulmonary embolism with shock, the patient may need reperfusion. For fluids, I would be cautious. A small crystalloid bolus around 250 to 500 ml may be reasonable if the patient is preload sensitive. If hypotension persists, I would start norepinephrine to support mean arterial pressure and organ perfusion. And because this patient is hypotensive with massive pulmonary embolism, systemic alteplase is considered as reperfusion therapy if there are no contraindications. This is the key distinction. Anticoagulation prevents clot propagation. Thrombolysis lyses clot. So now comes the attending challenge. The senior attending asks, he is hypotensive. Would you give 2 liters of fluid? My answer would be no, not automatically. This is obstructive shock with right ventricular failure physiology. A large fluid bolus can worsen right ventricle dilation. When right ventricle dilates more, it can push the septum into the left ventricle. That reduces left ventricular filling. If the left ventricle fills less, cardiac output can fall even further. So, in massive pulmonary embolism, hypotension does not always mean the patient needs large volume fluids. I would be cautious. If needed, I will use I will give cautious small bolus, then reassess and use norepinephrine if shock persists. The pearl is avoid large fluid boluses in obstructive shock. More preload is not always better. Now, the patient receives oxygen by high flow nasal cannula. Unfractionated heparin, cautious 250 ml crystalloid bolus, norepinephrine, and systemic alteplase. 30 minutes later, the patient improves. Blood pressure rises from 82 over 48 to 102 over 64. Heart rate decreases from 126 to 108. Oxygen saturation improves from 86% to 95%. Lactate decreases from 6.4 to 5.2. So initially, the treatment appears to be working, but then the nurse calls. The patient develops a severe headache and becomes confused. Blood pressure is now 168 over 96. Heart rate is 72. GCS is 12 out of 15. CT brain shows an acute left intracerebral hemorrhage. This is the complication that changes the case. What happened? This is symptomatic intracerebral hemorrhage after systemic thrombolysis. It is one of the most feared complications of alteplase. Alteplase activates plasminogen into plasmin. Plasmin breaks down fibrin that helps dissolve clot in the pulmonary circulation, but it can also impair hemostasis elsewhere in the body. If a cerebral vessel is fragile, hypertensive, or vulnerable, bleeding can occur. So, the same therapy that may have saved the patient from dying of obstructive shock has now caused a life threatening brain hemorrhage. This is the central trade off of the case. The treatment was indicated because the pulmonary embolism was life threatening, but the complication is also life threatening. Now, my priorities change immediately. First, I would stop all thrombolytic and anticoagulant therapy. That means stop alteplase, stop heparin. Second, stabilize the patient. Assess airway, breathing, circulation, blood pressure, and neurologic status. Third, control blood pressure according to the intracerebral hemorrhage protocols and institutional guidance. Fourth, call neurosurgery urgently. Fifth, assess the CT carefully. I would want to know how large is the hemorrhage. Is there mass effect? Is there midline shift? Is there intraventricular extension? Is there hydrocephalus? Is there evidence of herniation? These findings determine whether urgent neurosurgical intervention is needed. I would also discuss reversal of fibrinolysis, such as cryoprecipitate to replenish fibrinogen, guided by labs and hospital protocol. Now comes the hardest part. The pulmonary embolism has not disappeared, but the patient now has an intracerebral hemorrhage. So we are balancing two life threatening problems. If we anticoagulate, the brain bleed may expand. If we do not anticoagulate, the pulmonary embolism may worsen or the patient may develop recurrent embolism. There is no perfect answer. At this moment, the brain hemorrhage becomes the immediate priority. So we stop alteplase and heparin, stabilize neurologic status, reverse fibrinolysis if indicated, control blood pressure, and involve neurosurgery. But we do not forget the pulmonary embolism. The team must reassess continuously. If anticoagulation is contraindicated and thromboembolic risk remains very high, such as inferior temporary vena cava filter may be considered depending on the clinical situation. Restarting anticoagulation later requires multidisciplinary discussion between ICU, neurosurgery, hematology, and possibly interventional radiology. The timing depends on the size and stability of the hemorrhage, repeat imaging, neurologic status, and ongoing pulmonary embolism risks. This is not a one person decision, this is a multidisciplinary medicine. There are three major clinical pulls from this case. First, treat physiology, not biomarkers. Troponin and BNP were elevated, but the key physiology was right ventricular strain and obstructive shock from massive pulmonary embolism. Second, anticoagulation and thrombolysis are not the same. Anticoagulation prevents clot propagation. Thrombolysis actively lyses clot and may restore flow faster. but it carries a much higher bleeding risk. Third, every powerful therapy has powerful complications. Alteplase can be life saving in massive pulmonary embolism, but it can also cause catastrophic bleeding. So, when we prescribe powerful therapy, we must also anticipate its complication. What I learned today is that medicine is often about trade offs. This case was not only about diagnosing massive pulmonary embolism, it was about deciding what risk matters most right now. At first, the patient was dying from obstructive shock. The priority was to restore perfusion. That is why thrombolysis was considered. But after the patient developed intracerebral hemorrhage, the priority changed. Now the brain bleed became the immediate life threatening problem. So the management had to change immediately. Stop alteplase, stop heparin, stabilize airway, blood pressure, and neurologic status. Call neurosurgery, reverse fibrinolysis if appropriate, and reassess the pulmonary embolism risks with the whole team. The final lesson is this: in clinical medicine, the safest decision can change when the patient changes. That is the mindset I'm trying to build through this episode. One case, one complication, one difficult decision, one step closer to thinking like a good attending. This is the experience. Thank you for watching and listening.